Hi folks, it's Chet from Tag Along with Chet. Well, as you can see, I'm standing in front of my hangar here in Vulcan in southern Alberta. And if you look at the area out here, you wouldn't even know it was winter. There's the dog. Grass is nice and brown. Not a bit of snow out here, nothing. Not really calling for any either, and it's already well into January, which is kind of unusual. Usually we would have snow. I think out east has had more snow than we had. Anyway, let's go inside and get in the hangar, and we'll do another session of Hangar Chet-Chat. I got the office being heated up right now, so we'll get in there. It's nice, comfy, cozy, and we'll give you another bit of adventure out of my logbook. Well, as you can see, I got the stove starting to heat up out here. We'll turn that off, and we'll just turn on the electric one once this is sort of preheated. The office, it's still a little cool in here, but first thing we got to do is make some coffee. Okay, you ready, Piper? You ready for this? Another episode of Hangar Chet-Chat? Okay, maybe you're not. Okay, well, you go to sleep. You're probably wondering, you know, the idea was actually to get in with the airlines as a pilot. Well, the income levels for a second officer at that time were not all that great. Plus the fact the chances of getting laid off were even greater. Plus you had to go for a medic. And there was a lot of negatives at that time. You really couldn't get in unless you had a lot of experience and a lot of hours in behind you. So that's why I did all this stuff. Well, actually I did it because I enjoyed the flying end of it. But as far as the actual learning or proceeding with any of my endorsements, I never really did that until later on. And what happened was I owned the Cessna 140 for about 3 years. And I accumulated, I think it was 275 hours during those 3 years, which for me was a lot of flying. If I look at that and I look at what I'm doing now, it doesn't even compare, because I do a lot less. I ended up thinking what I should do was go for my IFR and get that out of the way. So what I did is I sold my my Cessna 140. And I purchased a 1966 Piper Cherokee, and it was 1974. So that airplane was only 8 years old. And I look at that now and I say, if I were to buy an airplane now that was only 8 years old, I'd be paying well over $100,000 for it. Well, this airplane was nowhere near that. I think I paid about $12,000 for it. And then of course I had my other airplane which I sold. So I don't know, for some reason the money was, we were probably doing quite well as far as buying things in those days. A car wasn't that expensive. Now mind you, your salary wasn't all that what it would be today, but in comparison I still think we got more value for our money back in the 70s than we do now in the you know, 2019 or even prior to that. And this Cherokee, I'm telling you, it was loaded. It had 2 VORs, it had an ADF. It was almost an IFR panel. I think the only thing it didn't have was a heated pitot, which, well, you only needed if you were going to fly IFR. But I thought, okay, now I've got the airplane for doing the IFR, so what I'll do is I'm going to go and get some simulator training. So I went to an outfit called, it was in Hamilton, and it was called Martin Simulated Training Limited. And this guy, his name was Martin, He had a link trainer. Now, I don't know if you guys remember what a link trainer was, but you'll see him in the museum. So I feel really old. I started off in a link simulator. That was basically to keep the airplane right side up, and also starting to work on ADF and holds, standard procedures. Well, I've even forgotten most of this stuff, what I did. And I would go up there probably twice a week. And at that time, on a link trainer, you'd have 2-hour sessions, and it would be $34 or $36. What I would do is I'd leave Burlington. I'd jump in my Cherokee 140 out of Burlington Air Park, and I'd bomb up to Hamilton and park the airplane and whip into the back of the hangar out there. They had one of those big old World War II hangars, and I would do my sim training. And folks, I wasn't good at it. I was not a good candidate for a simulator. But anyway, I managed to go through that, and then finally I got onto another simulator, which was a lot larger, and it was a twin engine simulator. And I'd never flown a twin in my life, but anyway, the whole simulation was done on this twin. And it had constant speed props on it, and what did I know about constant speed props? I'd never even flown one with constant speed props on it. I would go up in this simulator, and they'd close the door on me, and I'd sit out there, and then you'd have to, and you were basically in the dark. You know, all you had was the instrument lighting, and so I'm sitting out there flying this damn simulator, and you're in a big box, really. They covered it all up. There was a door on the side, and you stepped in, and there was all the panel was in front of it, and it wasn't like it is nowadays. You didn't have the actual windows where you could look out. It had nothing like that, and it was just a maze of instruments, basically like a twin would be set up with the throttle quadrant. And I remember doing ADF approaches. We were doing simulated approaches into Toronto, and I would get it all set up. I'd get the ATC stuff, and he would be doing the ATC stuff through your earphones. So that's this Martin guy. And anyway, he'd come in and go in, and he'd get the airplane, try and get it stabilized for the approach. And I thought I'd have it all stabilized, and then I'd have to throw on some more flap, and I'd have to drop the gear. And like I said, I've never flown anything like that. So anyway, I used to screw that up royally. I'd come in for my, whatever it was out there, 500 feet and, I don't know, 2 miles or whatever the ADF approach was, and I'd do the landing, and then finally we started going using, it was the ILS. And, you know, an ADF approach I could do. Once it came to an ILS and a VOR, I got totally screwed up. I'd sit out there, I'd have a pen in my hand, and I'd sit out there trying to figure out what the reciprocal heading was on a VOR, you know, and math I was never good at, and I know that there's shortcuts to doing it now, but in those days it was a real hardship. Anyway, I got through that. Okay, finally I got all the way through it, and I think by the time I finished out there, I had something like 52 hours sim time. And that didn't take all that long. That went from November to January, I think it was. I finished in January. So that was done. Okay, now I had my Cherokee. Now I forgot to tell you something else too. I got married in 1972. I thought, well, okay, now I got all this IFR training behind me. I'm going to take my airplane, and my wife and we were going to fly the airplane down to the Caribbean from Burlington. That was, I guess we were going to go to Freeport was our first point in the Caribbean. And it was in the winter. So I got all the charts out, and I put them all on the floor like you did in those days. No GPS. All you had was VOR, ADF, and that was it. And on the big airplanes, we had inertial navigation, which of course you couldn't afford in a light aircraft. But anyway, so I thought, well, I had the nice big airplane. Now I had a Cherokee 140, and I was sitting, well, I had no problem. So I got the route all planned, and the wife was a little bit apprehensive about this. I'll tell you, she wasn't. She was a little apprehensive. So anyway, the day came that I was going to have, I don't know, I had a couple of weeks off or something like that, and we were going to bomb down there. So I got the charts all folded up and everything, and the next day we were going to leave. So we had all of our bags packed, and we're going to go out to the airport. Well, I looked at the weather. Now, at that time, I think I was already a flight dispatcher, so I knew a little bit about weather. Of course, I had to. But so I looked at the weather and I thought, this does not look good. I mean, there was a warm front that was coming up from overhead Michigan. It was already snowing to beat hell down through Michigan, which it normally does, like Muskegon, Grand Rapids, Lansing, moving into Detroit area. And that whole thing usually moved right up into southern Ontario, and it usually hit Ontario through the Toronto area and Hamilton, and then it would just go up to St. Lawrence and basically affect everything as far as the northern areas up through Muskoka area, and you'd get a pile of snow, and it would usually have freezing rain with it. And anyway, but we were going to go flying in my Cherokee ahead of this. Well, I sat down and I looked at it a little bit more in depth, and I said, nah, okay, it didn't have de-icing, I had nothing, and I knew that the tops were just unreal. I mean, there's no way you're going to get on top of this. So anyway, I said to the wife, I said, look, you know, we're still going to go, but we're going to fly down to Tampa, but not in the Cherokee. So I, of course, being with the airline, we just whipped out to the airport. I jumped on I guess we had some reciprocal arrangements with Air Canada at that time, and we jumped on an Air Canada flight out of Toronto Airport, and we flew down to Tampa, and on the climb out of Toronto, we were in the soup, I think, maybe 500 feet, and we climbed. And we climbed, and I timed it, and then finally we got on top of it, and the crew came out and said, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I'd just like to know, let you know that we're now cruising at 35,000 feet, and we're just coming up over the state of New York, and I don't know where it was, just over south of Buffalo somewhere. And we were in cloud that whole time. I was sitting by a window out there, and I'm looking out, and I never saw a damn thing out there other than cloud. The reason why I'm telling you this is because, okay, now I had a Cherokee 140. Now, a Cherokee 140 doesn't fit on skis. There's no skis for it. So, in February, we were going to go up north again. But I didn't have an airplane to go up north. And that really peeved me off because Joe and Vic and myself, we were sort of the instigators in this trip, flying north in February all the time. So, had a friend of mine, he had a Cessna 140 as well. And he was a retired captain with Air Canada. And he said to me, well, Chet, he says, why don't you come with me and you can log the time? Because, of course, he didn't need the time. We got a lot of publicity because what happened was, since we'd set it up, and of course we did this every year, it became known that we did this. So there's a bunch of crazy guys going up north in the middle of February when it was nice and cold. One of the newspapers got a hold of us, and Joe, who eventually became, well, sort of the head of the gang, gave us the official name of the Milton Air Farce, as we were known. And we had a title to this particular episode that we were going to do, flying up to Moosonee, and it was called Operation Snowblind. So it was almost like a military exercise. And I'll just show you, this was in the newspaper. This is, I don't know if you can see this, but there it is. Operation Snowblind takes pilots to James Bay. I'll just read you something out here, and it's actually quite humorous, this editor out here. He probably thought we were all crazy anyway. He says, the notorious Milton Air Farce venture into the Northland was called Operation Snowblind. But anyway, the newspaper goes on. It says, the unbelievable Milton Air Force recently completed a grueling tactical maneuver into Ontario's vast Northland, and General Joe Hendrick, and now Joe was this friend of mine that owned the cabin up north on Fox Island from the previous video that you saw. One of the organizers reports it was a fantastic success. Proof of its success can be seen in the fact that all 8 local aircraft and their light aircraft returned unscathed from the journey northward that was known as Operation Snowblind. When they set out on the flying holiday into the snow country, none of them were sure they would ever enjoy the comforts of southern Ontario civilization again. Okay, I'll just, I won't go through all the details in here, but I'll go through some of the highlights of it. On this particular trip, we had 8 participants. The participants in the February frolic were Stu. Yeah, he bought my Cessna 140. And then there was Burke, and I was flying with Burke. Then there was me, Tom, and then there was Bob from Temagami. Now Bob, he owned the local air service in Temagami. It was Joe and then Vic and Rick. So we covered about 1,500 air miles in the week, and the first leg of the trip was to Temagami, where we normally would go to Joe's cottage, and that was sort of the headquarters. And then we went further. Stopped in Cochrane for fuel, and then bombed off to Moosonee. And the way you got up to Moosonee was you basically could follow the railway track. So all of us were pretty well in a line just following the railway track. And the question often came up, okay, now what's going to happen when you have an engine failure? Because all the trees out there were maybe about 4 or 5 feet high, more shrubs than anything else, but they were just sticks sticking out of the tundra out there. And then there was this railway track that went up north. We all followed this railway track, and of course it was usually covered in snow. And if you were going to make an emergency landing, you just land on the tracks because you had skis on, so you just... Anyway, never happened, but anyway, we landed in Moosonee, and we all, after a while, got settled in a little inlet, and it was right behind the missionary that lived out there. It was a Catholic. I had a Catholic school. No, I had a Catholic church there, and I think the priest out there was also a missionary, and he would fly. He was also a pilot, and he would fly along the east coast of James Bay and Hudson's Bay, or west coast of James Bay and Hudson's Bay, and he had his various areas where he would go and visit the locals out in that area on his with his ski plane. He had a found aircraft. It was called a found, and I don't know if you can see it out here, but I'll show it. Oh, there we go. That's where we're all parked. Okay, right there, and that's the found aircraft right there. That one, that was his, and there you can see all the airplanes in the inlet right between Moosonee and across the river, or whatever it was. I don't know, it was an inlet. There was the island of Moose Factory. And so the next day we stayed there one night, and we were going to go a little further. Well, I mean, we had to be absolutely out of our minds when I think about it now, because I would never do this again. But we were going to fly to the Belcher Islands in February. Well, the Belcher Islands is a bunch of islands which are part of the Northwest Territories. And Joe, he always wanted to have it in his logbook that he flew to the Northwest Territories. So we all said, oh, what the heck, why not? Well, the Northwest, I mean, to get to the Belcher Islands was insanity, because you'd have to go up the east coast of James Bay, and then the east coast of Hudson's Bay, and then cut across to go to the Belcher Islands. Anyway, we said, yeah, all right, fine. So we all fueled up, and we got in our airplanes and bombed off, and I remember we got about a half hour out of Moosonee, and visibility just went, I mean, there was none. Now, I was flying, like I said, with an Air Canada captain. I was flying his airplane, and I can't remember who took over, whether he took over or whether I just managed to get it back, but we managed to get it turned around. And now, mind you, again, it's just a Cessna 140, folks. And all the other guys were either flying Super Cubs or Champs or Piper Cubs. So, I mean, there was nothing as instrumentation. I mean, I don't know how we managed to do it, but we all basically flew into this whiteout, and we managed to turn around and come back to Moosonee. Well, we were weathered in Moosonee for a couple of days, I think it was, and finally, we got back out of there and ended up going back. Then we actually made a side trip up to La Sarre. Okay, Bert had to go back. He had to go back to back home. So he flew back home by himself, and I stayed up there, and I flew with Vic. Now I'm going to show you what happened there. I don't know if I can set it all up right out here, but anyway, we flew up to La Sarre and that was the same place where Vic ended up going with Jim to pick up the parts for the airplane previous year. We had a real good time in La Sarre. We went to a pub that night and we drank a lot and all this, and anyway, we came back and we stayed over at I can't remember if we stayed in a motel or a hotel out there, but anyway, we visited this friend who had a strip out in his by this barn full of parts, and that's where we had our airplanes parked. We bombed off, and of course, most of us weren't feeling all the greatest because we'd had quite a few Grand 5 ans, you know, the 50s. They're bottles about this. Well, they were big Grand 5 ans. Anyway, we ended up going to fly back, and I can remember we were flying over a lake, and it had snowed quite heavily that night, but it was good clear weather, and so we had a good pack of snow, a good foot anyway, that fell on top of what was already there, and I had to take a leak. It always happens. You get up in the air, you put me in an airplane, and the first place I'm in is the washroom. So anyway, but that's now. But then it was the same way. So anyway, I ended up, I'm sitting in the front of the Cub, Vic's in the back, and he's flying. And I said to Vic, Vic, boy, I got to take a leak. And Vic said, well, he's rumbling around, and we didn't have all that much stuff with us, but he went out in the back, and there's this little canvas sack out in the back of the Cub, and he rumbled around out there, and he pulls out this bag, and it was just a normal, I don't know, it was a plastic bag, and it had a dried up old bun in it. A part of our survival gear. I don't know, but anyway, it had this dried up old bun in it. And he said, well, he says, you can use this. And I thought, geez, that's... And then I found out it had a hole in it. So I thought, I don't know, that ain't going to work. I get up, and of course, I got a snowsuit on. Well, and I had, you know, long underwear on. And so anyway, I started unzipping my snowsuit. And then now to do your thing, to sit down in a Cub where you're pretty cramped already, and then take a leak is darn near impossible. So you have to almost stand up. So you picture me standing up in the front of the Cub, or partially standing up with my back bent, with my rear end hanging over the the back seat, trying to take a leak, and I couldn't. I just don't. Anyway, eventually, everybody decided, well, geez, I guess we got to take a leak too. So we all landed. And it was on this lake. So we landed on this lake. I forget how many planes were there that time. I think there was only maybe 4 or 5 of us at that time. We landed on this lake. And and Vic on his Cub had what was known as wheel skis. Now they were old-fashioned type. They were wooden skis, quite wide, and the wheels were clamped on top of the skis. Anyway, we went in and we came to a stop pretty fast because all the snow started piling up against the wheels, and we sunk quite a bit. And it was deep. it was deep snow. And I thought, how the hell are we ever going to get back out of here? So anyway, I just had to get out. So open up the clamshell doors, and I kind of fell out. And I thought, well, I'll just walk down to the end of the wing out here and just relieve myself. Okay, now folks, you've got to vision this. Vic is sitting in the cub, and he's got his little brownie camera with him. So I got out there, and I'm standing sort of sideways out there. And I don't know if I can show you this, but anyway, this is what it looked like. Okay, I'm gonna get up. Got a picture of Vic sitting in the airplane, and I'm standing underneath the wing, and I finally got the whole snowsuit hanging down along my ankles, and I had to undo my belt. Okay, so I undid my belt. Okay, so this is basically what it looked like. Okay, so my belt's hanging out like this. Okay, and it's just hanging down. I'm relieving myself. Put myself back together again. Okay, so I'm back in the airplane, climbed back in the front seat, and we took off. Get back into Temagami, everything's fine. I go home. I get back to Burlington Air Park one day, and Vic in his office, he had various stuff under glass when you walked in where the customers would come in and pay. And there's a picture of me standing in the snow with my ski suit, or my skidoo suit, wrapped around my ankles. And when you see it, you got to remember, this is just a brownie camera. It was a little distorted, but you see somebody standing out there with with this belt hanging down, and it sure didn't look like a belt hanging down. That was one of my experiences, and I remember the female customers that used to come in used to get a real laugh out of this and say, "Who is that guy?" Now, I wish I had that picture, but that was so many years ago. Anyway, folks, I'm going to leave it at that because, like I said, we had more adventures going up north, so I won't go into that. Thanks for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. The normal thing, subscribe. Right down the bottom, that side, you'll see the little my face, and just click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And thanks for coming along. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you again. Bye for now.